normally do Nearpod as a interactive lesson with students in the classroom, but I'm going to try this a little bit different. As we see here, we're getting into the solar system. And in our solar system, we have the sun, of course. We have the inner planets. We have the gas giants. We have the ice giants, or considered the jovials. And in here, you've got Pluto, which was voted off the island or voted off the solar system, so to speak, well, actually, my second year teaching, so about 12 years ago. And then, of course, we have some space debris scattered in, comets, meteors, things like that. Now, the Georgia Science Standard that we're going to be dealing with is S6E1, obtain, evaluate, and communicate information about current scientific views of the universe and how those views evolved. We're going to be, in particular, looking at Substandard C, analyze and interpret data to compare and contrast the planets in our solar system in terms of size relative to the Earth, the surface and atmospheric features, the relative distance from the sun, and their ability to support life. Now, we're going to get into a reading passage. I'm going to hit some high points as you read through it, and then we'll have some questions at the end. But before we get started, we do need to discuss some vocabulary. Orbits are, of course, the paths that an object takes around the sun. And in the case of our solar system, those orbits are normally elliptical. Rings, these are elliptical particles around the gas giants, and they're usually made of ice and dust and water, and they generally orbit a planet. Hydrogen is, or hydrogen and helium are two things that are undergoing fusion and fission on the sun to create energy. The rocky planets are your inner planets. They include Earth, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and then you have the gas planets, which include Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, or Uranus, depending on who you talk to, and Neptune. Now, as we've discussed in a previous lesson, people once believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. Silly, right? Well, it took a thousand plus years for people to finally understand that actually the sun was the center of the planet or the center of the universe. Now, what keeps all the planets from floating away from the sun? Well, the simple answer to that is Jupiter, or not. The simple answer to that is gravity. Gravity is the force that keeps things closely tied together. And again, as you see here, Pluto lost planetary status in 2006, my first year teaching. However, I'm still partial to Pluto, and the little acronym that goes with it, or the mnemonic, my very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas. Pluto was always a part of that as a kid. And in talking to a planetary scientist from the University of Tennessee, whenever Pluto was voted out of the solar system, or not necessarily out of the solar system, but out of planetary status, very few scientists actually participated in that vote. So you can say that Pluto lost out based on the minority of scientists around the globe. Now, between the inner and outer planets, you have what's called an asteroid belt. An asteroid belt is basically a belt of junk, space junk, so to speak. And this is sort of what it looks like. It's just hanging out, floating around, so on and so forth. Now, We do have 8 planets in the solar system, minus Pluto, of course. The inner planets are considered the rocky planets. These are the planets that either have no moons or very few moons, and they are consistent mostly of rock. These do include Mercury, Venus, Mars, and of course my favorite, Earth. Now, these guys, no rings, and they are much heavier. Then you get into the gas giants or the jovial planets. Jupiter, which is the largest planet of all, and then you have Saturn. And Saturn kind of looks like it's kind of like if you want it, then you should have put a ring on it. Well, Saturn has plenty of rings, so to speak. And the rings, even though they're pretty wide, the rings of Saturn are about as wide as the distance from the Earth to the moon. However, it's maybe only a kilometer thick. But then you get into the ice giants, um, Saturn and Uranus, or Uranus, depending on who you talk to. And the gas and ice giants, these guys have many moons, like tens of moons. True or false? Planets are made up of gases, tend to move more slowly than the smaller rocky planets. True or false? Oh, that made it easier. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are known as inner planets because they have rocks inside them. And true or false? The gas planets can have rings and often have many moons. Take a couple seconds and answer those questions, and we'll go over them in just a sec. Now, planets that are made up of gases tend to move more slowly than the smaller rocky planets. That is indeed false. Mercury, Venus, Earth are known as inner planets because they have rocks inside them. No, they're actually made up of rock. And the gas planets can have rings and often many moons. That is a fact. True or false? Moons are part of the solar system because they orbit around the sun. True or false? Asteroids are known as space trash because they're left over from the planets were formed. And true or false? The farther the planet is from the sun, the more difficult it is to visit. Answer those and we'll talk about them in just a sec. Now, moons are part of the solar system because they orbit the sun. False. I have mixed feelings about this. While, yes, they are technically orbiting their planets, the planets are orbiting the sun, and thereby, or by default, the moons technically would also be orbiting the sun. But directly, they orbit their planet, and so the answer is false. Asteroids are, in fact, known as space trash, and the farther a planet is from the sun, the more difficult it is to visit. That is definitely a fact. True or false? The rings around Venus are made of ice and rock. True or false? The inner planets have few moons around them. And true or false? The Earth is the center of the solar system. Take a couple seconds and answer those, and we'll go over them. Rings around Venus are made of ice and rock. That is false. The inner planets do have few moons around them, if any at all. And the Earth is the center of the solar system. That is a incorrect answer based on the geocentric model, which is no longer in effect. that concludes our lesson on the solar system, or the introduction of the solar system. We will go in more detail in future assignments and future lessons. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good evening.